afternoon, and welcome to the Elections and Human Rights Discussion Series organized by the Institute for the Study of Human Rights. This event is co-sponsored by Columbia Votes, Columbia Law School's Human Rights Institute, Social Work Votes, and CEPA's Human Rights and Humanitarian Policy Program. Thank you to them and to all of you for joining us today. Each individual has the right to participate in the conduct of public affairs, including through free and fair elections. Moreover, elections have profound impacts on a range of human rights. During today's panel, Ensuring the Equal Right to Vote, we'll explore issues that negatively impact the right to vote and tactics to help ensure this right. These issues are important during any election, but as the comments raised during last night's debate further elucidated, this is in many ways a unique year. ISHR is honored to have a wonderful group of panelists joining us today who will share their perspectives based on years of experience working on these issues. The individuals joining us today are Sylvia Albert, Director of Voting and Elections at Common Cause, Adriel Cepeda, Senior Staff Attorney at the American Civil Liberties Union, Ruth Greenwood, Lecturer in Law and Co-Director of the Voting Rights and Redistricting at the Campaign Legal Center at Harvard University, Fred McBride, Redistricting and Voting Rights Policy Specialist for the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, Lisa Schur, Director of the Program for Disability Research at Rutgers University, and our moderator today will be Liz Jaff, President and co-founder of Be a Hero. During the second portion of this event, we'll be opening up the discussion to questions from all of you who are joining us today. So please feel free to use the Ask a Question feature on Zoom. Thank you again, and Liz, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here, and I think it's really good for everybody as we try to get a semblance of calm. I apologize to everybody in advance because I'm speaking from my phone, so welcome to Zoom. But we have such incredible experts on the phone, and if you are like me and you watched the debate last night, you may be slightly panicked. There might be a very bit of part of you that's really panicked, and I'm really interested to actually ice break with our panelists and just, I want to start off and get a quick snapshot of how did you feel about the question that was brought up right at the beginning of the debate, or right in the middle of the debate, where there was an ask if Trump would accept the election results and if Biden would accept the election results. And as experts in voting rights, I'm kind of going to throw this out as our first question. What were your feelings about the response of both candidates? Anyone's welcome to start there. Maybe Lisa, Sylvia, anybody, just throw out your thoughts.
I honestly think the responses of the candidates are irrelevant. As Vanita Gupta of the Leadership Conference said in an op-ed in the Washington Post, we have the Constitution and a rule of law. The president is elected by the people. No person, be it Donald Trump or Joe Biden, gets to say whether or not they are president. And so, we will follow the rule of law and the Constitution.
And if I may, I have to agree with that. I guess I'm a little perplexed because this question always seems to come up as if the candidates decide the outcome, and that's not the case. The voters do. And like in 2000, and I was a part of that in 2000, it may end up in a higher court, but no matter the disappointment, no matter the side, it's got to be done through our system. It has to be done through our system of government. And whatever the decision is, it's not left up to those individuals, it's left up to us. And for us to accept it, I taught government for many years and in political science classes, and you accept the will of the majority and you move on. There will be another election. This isn't a lifetime appointment like the Supreme Court. So you accept it and you move on once you clear up all of the potential mess.
Okay, so Fred, first of all, Sylvia and Fred, thank you, because for a layman like myself, that is incredibly relaxing and therapeutic to hear. That it's not really based on the candidate, it's based on what we the people are requiring. So I am going to follow up a little bit on that because Sylvia, you talked a little bit about the Constitution, and I want to follow up and say, but why isn't the right to vote in the Constitution? And so maybe it would be nice for you to kind of set up through that, but I am interested in how the Supreme Court does play a role in the right to vote And Fred, as you said, this may come to the Supreme Court. I would love to ask, because I think a lot of us don't know, for example, when you had the election results back with Bush versus Gore, what was that result like? Why did that happen? And what happened with the Supreme Court that, that made that decision happen? And how is it going to impact now with the new nominee? I'll go to Fred first.
And let me take the back end of that. Well, I'll start with this. It wasn't expressly stated at the Constitution because the right to vote was only allowed to white male property owners. And there's this discussion from authors and philosophers and thinkers that predate the framers writing at that constitutional convention that somehow property ownership equated with intellect. So if you were smart enough to make a lot of money, then you had the intellect to be able to vote. And it was obvious that they weren't going to allow enslaved individuals to vote. Enslaved individuals were thought of as chattel, as property. And women, unfortunately, were thought to be tied to children, the home, not significant, should not be a part of this process that is for rich white men. So Civil War amendments come about much later than they should have. You get that right extended beyond sex, then you get it extended beyond race first, then you get it extended beyond sex, and then we get statutory laws like the Voting Rights Act to ease the burdens placed on individuals from voting, protected classes. With that, then I forgot your second question.
No, that's okay. There were two questions in there. So the first thing was about the Constitution. So that is incredibly helpful, the feedback you provided. My second question lent a little bit into what role would the Supreme Court play in this election, this cycle, if, for example, this election was very close? Because as you said, this will come down to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is all over the news with the new nominee. How would the Supreme Court play a role in this cycle's election?
Okay, and I'll be brief here because attorneys can weigh in a lot more than I can.
Sure.
If you recall, I'm old, so I can do this. Back in 2000, between Al Gore and George W. Bush, it came down to votes in Florida, some 540 some odd votes. And Justice Scalia, the Florida Supreme Court decided to continue counting. A Supreme Court justice weighed in, told them to stop. The parties fight each other. This ends up by original jurisdiction. This goes straight up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided to stop the vote, and it ended up with 500 and some odd votes in favor of George W. Bush, only because that was the one state in flux and no one had 270. Now, this could happen again. It could, and we all know that we likely won't get a winner election night because we've got to count tons of mail-in votes. But in the event the parties go after each other, there are disputes of fraud, and I put that in quotes because I've been doing voting rights for over 20 years. I've never seen a case. I've heard of a couple, but I can tell you on one hand how many of those I've heard of. So the alleged fraud, these stories you'll hear about ballots in streams and rivers and lakes and postal service workers doing all of this, you're really gonna have to vet that out. And this is what the courts and the attorneys are gonna have to do. So it could end up in the courts. Hopefully it won't. Hopefully it won't, because we don't want courts to determine the president. We want the voters to.
Fred, thank you. I'm going to actually see if Adriel from the organization that he's at has a little bit of a follow-up there for our rights, just to protect them a little bit further.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I mean, just jumping off from Fred's survey, the courts will probably be involved because of that voting rights history and what voting rights history has been in the United States, where there is no neatly recognized right to vote for all people. So you find it in different amendments and you get to it through activism and through grassroots movements, like most notably, of course, the civil rights movement. But what happens is that all ends up in the courts because you end up needing judges to sort out what those amendments or not means. I agree. Hopefully the courts don't need to be involved, but they already have been involved in this cycle. In what you've already said, what everyone says has just proved to be a truly unprecedented cycle. Many of the cases we've been, I'm with the ACLU Voting Rights Project. Many of our cases for the last 5 months have involved, are trying to ensure that everyone has access to vote safely, either from home or through early voting hours or early voting periods. Essentially, trying to prevent a nightmare scenario where you just have very long lines indoors on November 3rd, people, shoulder to shoulder, exactly what public health officials have been telling us we all need to avoid. And those cases have played out in the courts. We've sued several states, other groups have sued other states. And mainly those have been the states, for example, that don't allow all voters to vote by absentee ballot. Many states, around 15 to 17 or so, still require you to meet certain categories. So people, if you'll be away from the state, or if you're over 65, you may vote, but then a lot of people are not. And those cases have had varying success. We've seen them be successful as pressure on legislatures, essentially, to make them make those changes on their own, and which we're fine with. We don't need to win at the end of the day. We just want people to be able to vote safely. But but that has sort of played out in this idea of, like, are people entitled to, or do people have a right to vote by absentee ballot? It gets muddy, and it ends up playing out in the courts.
So I do want to follow up on what you just said there, Adriel, because I think absentee ballots are going to play a huge role this election cycle. Like you said, we're also very concerned about COVID. There's a huge population of older voters who vote, which specifically seems concerning. And a lot of different states have different rules for absentee ballots. And so I kind of want to connect that with the question of disenfranchisement, and also go to the disability community and check in with you, Lisa. What do we think is going to be the impact on absentee voting this election cycle, and how could this be part of a voter suppression tactic? I mean, I think we want to be very clear on how people can vote, how this will be different, and then also, since there's so many absentee ballots, how will this impact different communities in terms of language or disability to vote? Those are my two questions. So Adriel, if you want to take the first and then Lisa the second, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we know how it'll impact absentee ballot. We saw it. The pandemic sort of got going towards the back end of primary season in the United States, so we got to see several states' primaries play out in the middle of the pandemic. Earliest, of course, was Wisconsin's primary election in April 7th. That unfortunately, the state was unable to get many changes that some wanted together in time. We did see a blip or a spike in COVID cases right after that, and what we've seen going forward is just an enormous increase in absentee voting. Just from then, I've been working pretty closely in South Carolina, and it's something like 300% more absentee ballots were requested for the June primaries than were just 4 years ago. So we know that's how it will play out. As far as how it may play out in a voter suppressive sort of way, well, we would say that not giving everyone the chance to vote safely from home is a form of voter suppression in the middle of a pandemic. It's unfortunately a pandemic that we know disproportionately affects Black people, disproportionately affects minorities, disproportionately affects people with voters with disabilities. So it's sadly tracks all the other voter suppressive things or means or trends we've seen in the last 50 years. But right, we've been pushing for all voters to have that right, because the way we frame it, the theory behind these cases is that you're just putting voters to an impossible choice. You're telling them, on the one hand, stay home, stay safe, protect yourselves and your family, especially if they're over the age of 65, especially if they're Black, especially if they have underlying conditions. But at the same time, you're telling them you have to leave home to vote. So that's the way that's played out. But I'll point out that there are ways to be disenfranchised by absentee ballot even once you have a chance to vote, and we've been working on those as well. So you said it yourself. I mean, and the number of ballots is just going to be like something we've never seen before. So in many states, advocates and lawyers have been pushing to allow officials to start counting those ballots as they arrive or a week before they arrive, not so they have to start on November 3rd. There are certain requirements, like, for example, states like Alabama, Missouri, South Carolina require you to have a witness signature on your ballot. That is a problem, again, for hundreds of thousands of people who live alone, and many of whom are older than 65, and would now have to come near someone, doesn't matter who, someone they may not know, someone whose circumstances they may not understand, to get them to witness that ballot. So we have many cases that, where the theory of the case is that may be a modest burden for voters in the best of days. Guess what? This is not the best of days. These are not the best of days, and we're not voting in the best of days. So, and there are other things like that. There's Pennsylvania currently, you just had a ruling last week where the Supreme Court ruled that Pennsylvania has you get two envelopes. You get like a privacy envelope, and then you have to put that privacy envelope in a larger envelope, and then you send that ballot. So, now it's the Supreme Court has said basically any ballot that just gets there without that first privacy envelope, it's called a naked envelope, and that won't be a naked ballot, and it won't be counted. So, we just encourage everyone to sit down with your ballot, read your instructions.
Yeah.
The worst possible thing here would be to be inadvertently disenfranchised because you didn't check a box in the several things that you were supposed to do because your state has required you to do them.
Yeah, Adriel, that's a lot of what you've just said is very depressing, but the end part was really nice where you said, just check your ballot, check what's going through. And we are going to talk at the end of this about what you can do to take action, because we don't want to end with this just being the deepest, darkest despair. Because the good news is we have democracy and we can all vote and make our decisions.
Yeah, you unfortunately, sorry, you asked a litigator. I tend to just see the bad stuff.
No, I mean, it's also, it is 2020. There is darkness in our soul. It's okay. It's okay. But I'm going to go over to Lisa, because I think specifically in a good day, the disability community has been disenfranchised with voting. And I mean, once again, this is 2020. It says right now that more people than ever before in America want to vote. I co-founded a PAC with Adi Barkan, who has ALS, and the only way that he can vote is by, his eye gaze technology, via an electronic ballot. The whole process is pretty intense. So Lisa, can you talk a little bit about what this looks like with the disability community, and also how far this reaches and what we can do to help in any way?
Yeah, so let me just step back for a second. Historically, there's been this disability gap in voting. It's 6 to 7 points in general elections. There's this stubborn disability turnout gap. And it's not explained by demographic characteristics. It looks like difficulties in voting account for a large part of that gap. And voting by mail can help, but it's certainly not a panacea. In 2012, we did this survey, and we found that 13% of people with disabilities who voted by mail had problems, compared to less than 1% of people without disabilities. And now you know, and a lot of states make it more difficult. I know with, I think it was Nevada, they said that only family members could assist someone with a disability in voting by mail. And in Minnesota, it was you couldn't help more than 3 people. So these kind of issues for people who have mobility impairments or other impairments or difficulties that make it hard to fill out a ballot or need help having somebody bring the ballot, you know, mail in the ballot, those kind of things can really be, make it impossible for them to vote. That being said, in states where everyone votes by mail or voting by mail is easier, we find that the turnout gap is smaller for people with disabilities. So in Washington state, for instance, that's where you see the smallest gap, where everybody votes by mail. So the good news, I think, possibly is that with more and more people voting by mail and more states that just are sending ballots in and not making it difficult, I think we're going to see a real surge in voting by mail among people with disabilities. That's not to say there aren't going to be problems, but I'm somewhat optimistic in that.
Sorry about that. Zoom challenges. I think the fact that you're optimistic makes me feel better and makes me a bit more optimistic. Relatively, I understand. I did want to also take it back a bit, and this might be a good question for Sylvia. If we step back a little bit beyond the absentee ballots, there are, President Trump yesterday said that he wanted his supporters to watch at the polls. He also talked about ballots being, found in creeks, and Wanda Sykes had a pretty good response to that she was going to go look in the creek for her ballot that was not lost. As Fred said, there is very, very few examples of voter fraud, but I did want to ask, what are the examples that people should look for when they are in line for the polls of potential voter suppression, and what are actions that they can take? And this might be a Sylvia question or Adriel, but just I wanted to put it out there because I think that was brought up yesterday.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yes, you're right that the things that the president has cited don't actually exist. And as Fred has said, there is more of a chance of getting hit by lightning or winning the Mega Millions, of which I would love to win, than for your ballot to have any sort of issues. But what seems to be more likely this time around is that there could be efforts to intimidate voters and stop them from being able to access the ballot. We did see a couple weeks ago in Virginia, on the first day of early voting in Virginia, a group of Trump supporters blocking the entrance to an early voting location and chanting and interfering and intimidating voters. So first thing to know, I think, is that these things have been, there's sort of this rhetoric has been around for a while, right? There was all this talk in 2016 about people showing up at the polls, and in 2018, and really for the most part, it doesn't really materialize, and it's only small pockets. That being said, if it does happen, you should know that the Voting Rights Act and state law protects you from being, from having your vote suppressed. You have a right to be there. And you can call, we have a nonpartisan nationwide hotline. It's 866-OUR-VOTE, and that is staffed by attorneys nationwide. And these attorneys have the connections to the local election officials. They respond when needed to make sure that you have access to the ballot. That's not just, some people disagree with me, but I also happen to think that poor election administration is also voter suppression. So if you are standing in a 7-hour line, also call us, because we're going to do something about that, right? If all of the machines are down and nobody's giving you paper ballots, call us, because we're going to do something about that too. I want the voters to know that, there's an army of lawyers and advocates and organizers who are here to protect your right to vote. So you go vote.
Thank you so much. We're going to send that number out at the end as well, if that's possible. Just saying to Columbia over there flagging, please, we're going to email this number out so everybody feels like they are empowered to both ensure they can vote, others can vote. If you have your absentee ballot, you're going to vote. I think that's really important. I did also want to take a second to look at tactics of voter suppression before you even get to the voting lines, which Adriel covered a little bit of, and so did Fred. But for example, purging the rolls, right, which Georgia has been accused of multiple times. Stacey Abrams is taking a fair fight to that. I know that that's one of the actions that's happened. But what are the other actions right now that are happening with voter suppression in different states that we should be aware of that also kind of paint this election? I did want to ask that to the group, just so we're covering everything. We've talked about absentee ballots, we've talked about on the day of election day, but what about in between it?
Well, we are seeing the kind of what I would term standard voter suppression, which, you know, using quotations. Robocalls are happening in Black and brown neighborhoods in a number of states, telling voters that if they vote absentee, that they are going to be subject to criminal charges. You know, kind of the standard Democrats vote November 4th, or you can vote online, or, you know, like there's a lot of that. And it's really just, you know, the creating an aura of fear around voting is, you know, a way to suppress the vote, which is why I'm also, you know, why I say, you know, don't be concerned about the talk of possible, you know, of people showing up at the polls. Like, you have a right to vote, and, you know, exercise that right and don't let anybody suppress it. And kind of the talk around it also is a suppressive measure.
And if I may, I agree with Sylvia. The tactics used to disfranchise voters is not new. It may be exacerbated this year, but it's not new. Every midterm and presidential election year, we deal with purges and these exact match signatures like the deal in Georgia. We deal with misinformation. We deal with voters being given or flyers in predominantly minority neighborhoods indicating a change in polling location. All of this has always happened. You may see more of it. And I'm also glad Sylvia mentioned the 866-hour vote number. The Lawyers Committee has been running election protection with over 100 partners for the last 15 years, which is a nonpartisan voter protection program. Call the hotline. There are people out on the field on election day in target states and target areas dealing with poll watchers, which aren't really there because they think that you're not who you are. They're there to intimidate you. And that is a violation. And we will be on top of it with Common Cause and ACLU and everybody else involved, because it's nationwide, because this isn't new. I just think you'll see and hear a lot more of it this particular election year.
I think,
go ahead.
Oh, keep going. No, go for it. Go for it.
I was going to say, in terms of throwing out ballots where the signature isn't exact, that's a particular problem in the disability community. Some people have difficulty signing their name. Some people have conditions where it becomes more difficult to sign the ballot. And we're finding that election officials tend to be very enthusiastic to throw out ballots that don't exactly match. And that has, I believe, a disparate impact on people with a lot of people with disabilities.
I think what's helpful is to know that this has been happening for years, right? Which I think kind of brings us back to when we kind of first looked at this. And I would like to talk a little bit about, you know, Shelby versus Holder, right? Specifically with this group here, one, kind of giving people an understanding of why we started to move forward to fighting for voting rights, which, as Fred has said, has been around for ages, right? Has been around for ages. We've all been fighting for it. We're still fighting for it. In many ways, it is a lot better. In other ways, I am interested in where we think we are backtracking. You know, there have been a lot of great strides made in places like Hawaii, in places like Wisconsin that are also pretty critical to turnout and have been mentioned by both Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Where are we slipping back? That's a question in terms of historically, like what is worse now and what is better?
I can jump on this. I don't know
Yeah.
if you'd like me to start with some background on Shelby versus
I would
Holder
love,
and.
I think we'd love some background on Shelby just for the rest of us. And then to kind of, and do me a favor, Adriel, can you go with what's bad and then go with what's better so we end on the better side?
Got it. Got it. Well, we'll come around back to that. I really do doubt my ability to end on a high note. I'm very bad about that. But you mentioned Shelby County versus Holder. It's a very important decision from the Supreme Court in 2013. It had to do with the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The Voting Rights Act is impossible to overstate its importance for voting rights nationwide. It's essentially the distillation of civil rights history in many clear ways. It just tried to fulfill promises made 100 years earlier in Reconstruction, after a civil war that happened because of compromises with slavery 100 years before that. So, there's like a straight line almost from the founding to marching at Selma and getting the Voting Rights Act. And like the key to this law was what was called Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which required certain states and localities that had a proven history of racial discrimination in voting. They had to send any changes to their election laws to the federal government, to the Justice Department, for what was called pre-clearance. Essentially, like they would get vetted before they were implemented, the reasoning being, we know that you have a history of racial discrimination, so we're not going to give you a pass. So in 2013, this goes to the Supreme Court. It's Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. Is struck down by a 5-4 ruling, with Chief Justice Roberts writing the majority opinion, and Chief Justice Roberts essentially says that, a lot has changed since 1965. The South is not what the South used to be. At this point in American history, again, we're just talking 50 years later. He says the Voting Rights Act impermissibly intrudes into areas that should be left to states, and it too specifically punishes specific states for past behavior. That's the reasoning for the Shelby County decision. So what that does is just take out that pre-clearance formula. In effect, the list of states or localities that had to submit their election changes to pre-clearance is no more. The pre-clearance system is still there, but it doesn't have any places to look to. So it's sort of a dead letter for the time being, and remains as such. The late Justice Ginsburg had this great line that said, looking to improvements that we've made because of the Voting Rights Act, and saying that you don't need the Voting Rights Act because of those improvements. It's like throwing out your umbrella in a rainstorm because you're not getting wet, which, she knew it. And that's sadly proved to be the case. We threw out our umbrella, and we've been getting wet for 7 years. The Section 5 served as a backstop. Once the low-hanging fruit, like poll taxes and literacy tests, were done, the pre-clearance requirement essentially ensured that there wouldn't be much backsliding into things like that. And the big problem is that the laws that we have now don't necessarily prevent discrimination before they affect an election. So, for example, we had a case in North Carolina alleging discrimination in voting out of a law that slashed early voting hours, eliminated same-day registration, imposed a very strict voter ID. This law was passed immediately after the Shelby versus Holder decision, and we won that case. The appeals court eventually wrote that the law was designed with surgical precision to disenfranchise Black voters, but that was 34 months after we filed our case. And by that point, the 2014 midterm had already taken place. 192 federal and state offices had been voted on in this discriminatory regime. So there's no way to redo redo an election. And that's what you've sort of seen, this rushing back of what are called like more second generation voter suppression measures, the purges you referred to, voter ID, voter lists, and this is all stuff that we know disproportionately affects minorities and people of color. You know, if I may to try to end on a high note, there's been a lot.
Adriel, please.
There's been a lot of movement in this space. A lot of it has to be done through legislative means, and the Democratic House in the last year or so has passed a new revamped formula for the vote to plug back into the Voting Rights Act that would essentially like kickstart again the pre-clearance regime. And not only that, but it would make it more holistic. It would actually like review all jurisdictions and look back, like, you know, how have you done these past 10 years? And if you have several violations in those 10 years, then you're in there, whether you're, you know, Jackson, Mississippi, or you're in New York City. You might end up there. So that passed the House, got stuck in the Senate, but you know, we're very hopeful that in a new Congress, it gets a new look, and that should be the first thing on the docket if there's a new administration and a new Senate.
I did want to actually follow up, because that is actually a good note. So Adriel, thank you. I want to say plus marks for ending on a better side. So what I do know as a layperson in this situation is HR 1 and HR 4, I believe, are pretty progressive pushes on the Voting Rights Act. I would love to ask each of you here, if you had a magic wand and could add anything to it or make it even more open or progressive if you could, I'd like to know what would be your perfect voting rights bill. Like, what was left out that you'd like to add in? And I'd love for each of our panelists to answer that. Who would like to go first?
I'll start off. I thought the Voting Rights Act in its original form was fine. And Section 5 was, as everything Adriel said, it halted some practices. So we had a chance to get involved. Department of Justice could weigh in to see if this pattern or practice diluted voting strength for minorities. And they could stop a lot, which saved us a whole lot of work. And getting that back, to me, I would be satisfied. I would say if I had my way, I'd like to do it honestly without a 25-year extension. Just make it permanent. Just make it permanent. I get the rationale for that. They later amended it and included language minorities. Maybe there could be some sort of extension. We can always improve upon something. But if you got Section 5 back in some form, even if you had to tinker with the coverage formula, I think most voting rights activists would be happy with that.
Got it. And Fred, can I just do one follow-up before I go to the other folks? When you say 25 years, for those of us out there who don't really know that much about it, you mean it takes 25 years to rectify, to identify these states that are making these issues? What do you mean by 25 years?
Well, when it was passed, they would have extensions. So the extension was for that period of time, and then you had to reauthorize it.
Oh
so
my
it
gosh.
was reauthorized in 2005. I worked on this, I should remember. 2005, 2006. But it was
06.
reauthorized. So you would reauthorize it, because I guess part of passing it in 65 was like, look, we won't make Section 5 permanent. We'll give these covered jurisdictions time to fix their racism, you know? So then 25 years go, and then you see if you need it again. Well, in 2005, we needed it again. And we worked on an extensive packet for the courts displaying all of the violations over the past 25 years. But the court didn't find that, I guess, compelling.
I hear you. Let's the rest of the crew, what would you have if you had your dream for the voting rights for HR 1, HR 4, the Voting Rights Act? What would you have reintroduced?
I agree with Fred. I mean, I think just having a pre-clearance regime doing that upfront work, frankly, goes a long way. You know, one thing we've seen especially in advocating for this new voting rights bill last year, the ACLU like went back and looked at what's happened in the last 7 years, and a lot of the cases we've brought, unfortunately, were in jurisdictions that had that pre-clearance formula to begin with. So, you know, the states that were covered in 1965 were still causing a lot of trouble right now. So even if we just got that back, that would do a lot of help. I think everyone, you know, the voting rights community was on board with the idea that the formula needed to be maybe improved upon, or that sure, the discrimination of 1965 isn't what is the discrimination of today, but throwing out the so-called, you know, baby with the bathwater wasn't like the right call here. It was you needed to improve that formula, not just get rid of it altogether, and that's what the court did.
Sylvia, Lisa, thoughts on HR 1, HR 4?
You know, HR 1 includes really a plethora of issues that we push at the state level. So as Fred and Adriel said, you know, HR 4 could do some, you know, there could be some changing with the formula, but you know, HR 1, it was written to encompass and protect different types of voters. So there are provisions in there for the Native American community. There are provisions in there for voters with disabilities. You know, and that's really our goal, is to protect all voters and get them access to the ballot.
Well, I'll just speak to issues affecting voters with disabilities. Certain supposedly accessible ballots have been found to be completely inaccessible. So I would just add the requirement that in terms of accessibility, they have to be vetted by people in the disability community who really understand what an accessible ballot looks like, and before they go out to voters, because we found a lot of times they're not. Even a ballot that's supposedly accessible to someone with vision problems, for example, there was a whole situation where they weren't at all. So I would just put that requirement in. That would be the first thing I do. And I just want to make the point that things like voter ID laws, for example, which may not be specifically targeting people with disabilities per se, they're more targeted, I believe, to Black communities, but they have an impact on many people with disabilities, Black, white, whatever, who often don't drive and don't have those kind of identifications. So there are a lot of people who are just disenfranchised, whether intentionally or not, and that needs to be changed.
Well, I think this really, first of all, thank you all. I do like that we kind of love what's going on right now with HR 1 and HR 4 and the current Voting Rights Act. And I do think it's an incredibly important point that depending on what the election results in, we could be bringing this bill up front and center to the next Senate and the next administration, who knows? But I think that, Lisa, you did raise a major point I think others have on this call, and there's also going to be a separate panel on this. But I mean, really, in many ways, voter suppression is just racism, and I think we have to call it out. And massively impacts the Black and Brown community. And so what I would like to focus on a little bit here is specifically around redistricting, because I think folks often like look at the concept of redistricting, try to understand why it's tied to voting rights, why it is so problematic in so many states and districts, and what we are doing to try to fix that. Maybe this goes to Fred first, but I would like to raise that as a major question in voter suppression.
Sure, Liz. It's important because oftentimes the manner in which electoral districts are drawn really determines who gets elected. So if you take a legislative body in a city, for example, every 10 years after the census, then you get numbers, and those numbers determine, aside from population, it's going to determine how many people, one person, one vote, per district. And if that particular body decides, well, Black and brown communities are growing in population since 10 years ago, we can't have that. So let's curve these lines and let's chop and let's have all kinds of appendages such that if we've got to create a majority minority district out of 5, let's just make sure it's 1. So let's pack them all together in a district that's 72% Black or Hispanic or Asian or whatever racial group we're talking about, or a combination of them. Let's pack them all together. That way that they'll get their 1, and then the other 4 will be white, and whites will still control it. That's the way it's been for years, and I'm sorry that I'm not talking past tense. This still occurs. So how that district is drawn is going to, in many ways, determine the outcome or that particular elected official. So we've got to think about it. You know, we talk so much about voting, and I'm glad I studied this. I've been doing this my whole adult life. I am glad that we emphasize get out the vote. We're now emphasizing get out the count. I'm glad that we're constantly dealing with voter suppression and fighting it, but we also have to do this battle next year, because it's an off election year, 2021, whenever we get this census data, by the way, I got to get in front of a computer and draw a district. So, and so do the other groups here. And so we've got to talk about voting, and we've got to continue talking about it, because after November 3rd, it's like, oh, I don't have to think about voting again until 2022. Yes, you do. And we've got to get that message out there. So I have been preaching redistricting. I think I dream about it. That's bad, but it's a majority of what I do, because it is so important. It is so important, and it is directly tied to redistricting. It's just not as popular as voting and voter suppression, but it is as vital.
Whew. I mean, for me, no, I don't think so at all. I'm processing what you're saying. And I think for me, redistricting is everything. And what's funny is, you know, I've run a couple of congressional races and state Senate races. And when you look at how the districts are cut, it is shocking. And, you know, to be honest with you, kind of both ways, it's that one area where you can see a lot of redistricting kind of focused on being nonpartisan, because, you know, we will cut on a Democratic side. Obviously, you know, I'm a Democrat. I think Columbia knew that when they invited me on. We will 100% in Maryland, right? We will cut out any area that there's a potential Republican. And it's a really interesting space. And I, in fact, ran a race that had flipped Republican, been redistricted Democrat, and then was coming back again. And it was fascinating. I think, however, I would say I do think the Republicans are much smarter and better at redistricting when you look at what they've done in Wisconsin and different spaces in Pennsylvania. And I think on a nonpartisan side, the question of changing redistricting is so critical. So I guess, Fred, to follow up on that, is there any election process that could help us change this? Like, is electing the Secretary of State something that could help? Is, you know, writing aggressive letters, is going in for advocacy? What can we do to help on redistricting? Because it seems like such a toxic issue.
I'll try not to be dire, and
Yeah,
I'll see where I can. I'll see where I can dig and find positivity in this.
Thank you,
For
Fred.
me, how I can skirt your question like they did last night. I'm going to skirt around it. What I can do is say that for me, because I don't draw for partisan interest, so I work behind this theory. Districts aren't drawn for parties or elected officials. They're drawn for people. They're drawn for the voters. I go in and I talk to community groups. Whoever calls us, Fred, can you come and look at this redistricting plan? You know what? sometimes, and I've done this in groups, I've done a lot of work in the South, I've done work in tribal lands, I've been everywhere. Sometimes you have to tell a group, I'm sorry, I know you've never elected a minority to the school board. I know you've never elected an African-American, Latinx, an Asian individual to Congress. I know you haven't, you don't have the numbers. There's nothing I can do about that because redistricting has a set of principles that I have to follow. And working for a nonpartisan organization, I'm compelled to follow them. So I'm not gonna skirt lines and I'm not gonna cut up communities. I still work under that belief that districts are drawn for the voters. They're drawn for the people. So, and the truth in that is, and here's my positive note before I shut up. The truth of that is, in say a rural area, that rural area can have Black farmers, it can have Hispanic farmers, it can have white farmers, it can have Asian farmers. That's a community of interest that has a lot of things in common. What's wrong with making sure all of them, if possible, can stay within that district?
Yeah.
I think if I think like that, that's a bit more positive than diving right into the race and the gerrymandering. So I'm gonna end there before I get back on the dire road.
No, I think that was, Fred, that was good. I want to praise you on ending it slightly in a better note. We're balancing it. This is a tough time. We have gotten some questions in from the audience, so I would like to kind of ask one or two that are going to be a little bit targeted. I'm going to take this first one, which we've touched on again, and I'm going to bring it up to another issue. Is a lot of folks know that this cycle, it looks like what's going to happen, as reported by many news outlets, is that a lot of Democrats are voting absentee. Republicans are known for voting on election day. So when those votes get tallied, there is often a case where you will have one candidate win and then the absentee ballots will come in and it'll suggest a different candidate wins. So let's say there's a scenario where on election day, Donald Trump claims victory because of the folks who have participated. And then, 5-6 days out, we've got the absentee ballots in, hopefully sooner than that, and it's a Joe Biden victory. How does that process play out in terms of if Trump claims victory, as he said he might last night, if Joe Biden is waiting for his results? How does the Supreme Court play in? What are our protections there? What does that process look like? That's the question. I'm putting it in a nicer way than what was phrased.
So I would love to take that.
Yeah.
Counting absentee ballots is not new. Whenever on any election night, what you have is the press saying projected winner. That is because nothing is certified. No election is certified until the ballots are counted according to the law of that state. Military ballots are allowed to be 15 days after the election, so they don't certify until they've counted military ballots. So it really, honestly, again, for all the talk of declaring oneself the winner of something, the ballots will be counted as they always are. The election will be certified as it always is, and the electors will be assigned. Can Donald Trump or Joe Biden try to create instability and make people feel unsure? Yes, but we actually do have the rule of law and the Constitution, and it will be followed. And also just point out, the majority of states actually count absentee ballots as they come in. So it's only, I think people are mostly concerned about Pennsylvania because Pennsylvania does not have early voting and is a particular area of interest for people. But my hope is that people make their plan to vote and they do it as early as possible. And we're already seeing, I think, 1 million Americans have already voted in this election, when I think the same time in 2016, it was something like 10,000. So my hope is that that is not going to happen because people will make a plan and vote, either early vote or send in their absentee ballots as quickly as possible.
I think that's great. Anybody else want to weigh in there?
I'll just add in a little bit to what Sylvia said, and I agree totally. I think that it's incumbent upon secretaries of states or whoever handles elections there that they publicly educate along with us. We'll do it, but I can't get some people that don't like the lawyers committee to go on the lawyers committee's website to read this stuff. But I think it's important for these state officials to let voters know, as Sylvia said, this isn't a new process. Military ballots come in, absentee ballots come in, there's a pandemic. So guess what? Triple, double, 1,000 times that number, it's gonna take us time to count. So they have to be committed to educate their citizenry about the process. And we've been telling people forever, you're not possibly going to know that night. Be patient and wait. But if someone jumps the gun and says they won, we just have to keep reiterating, and hopefully the media will do it. Wait a minute, there are 1 million mail-in ballots that have to be counted, and it's going to take a few weeks or a few days. I don't want to say a few weeks. Last night I heard 3 months or something. But we have to educate the public. And if secretaries of states and election commission and county commissions won't do it, election officials won't do it, then we've just got to flood with media, radio, everywhere, that they need time to count. They need time to count. And we can do that without bringing in the court battle, because the court battle is about the ballots. It's not about the counting necessarily.
So I think that's a really important point, Fred and Sylvia, thank you. I also think, to be very clear, what we're reiterating here is your vote counts, your vote will be counted, and we need to trust in faith and democracy and also count that we voted. So one of the great ways to do it is you can say, I voted, I did this. You can call a hotline number if there are any issues, and you can ensure that other people are voting, which I think is another critical question that's kind of come through, and I would like to follow up on it. But one thing I wanted to do first is what Fred said. It seems like each state handles voting separately and often don't have the budget for counting, which is why a lot of these states or districts, numbers will come in very late. Is there a way to fix this? What is the situation within the states, and why are they not getting provided funding to actually do this?
I want to say, I believe there was a provision in one of the stimulus bills to give states money for this. You know, the issue with the Postal Service, all of that. Our executive director testified a few weeks ago. And that second stimulus package is held up. Congress passed, the House passed it, and the Senate won't meet on it, something to that effect. So that additional money was in there. There was additional money for the Census Bureau. Then the Census Bureau said, oh, we don't need it. I don't know how they could say that during this pandemic. But all of this was, so that was placed, it was in there. And there was a federal fix, but unless both houses agree, as everyone here knows, you're not gonna get that particular bill to pass. So I'm gonna throw it to the legislative branch on that part, but I think it's an easy enough fix that states can enact and do with enough effort.
And I think, just to follow through, that's exactly right, that the House did provide funding to deal with this exact situation early. This has not passed the Senate, which is very frustrating. And in many ways, I want to follow up that some of the thought is that folks are pretty happy with how the election process is currently in their states and don't feel like they need to have upgrades. I do think that goes back, as the partisan one on this call, because none of you are, and it's fantastic. I do think that you can make some changes by where you can vote for a Secretary of State, vote for one. Where you can make sure that your administration is following up, call them, ask them what their practices are. You as a citizen are allowed to know. How are you counting the votes? How are you processing them? Talk to your friends about it. But that comes to one of the questions from our audience members is, what can we do as regular people to ensure as many people as possible are ensured an equal right to vote? So what can lay people do to ensure that we help you on your fights? And specifically for this election, what can folks do? What are action items we can take to make ourselves feel a bit more hopeful right now? This is going out to the group.
So there is a nonpartisan volunteer network You can go to protectthevote.net. Make sure not to go to any other ones because there are bad things happening there. Protectthevote.net. And this is a way that you can volunteer to help inform voters around the country of their rights, help, take down mis and disinformation on online. If you would like to be a poll monitor, you can do that. We will be having people safely monitoring in person if they so desire, with all the proper PPE, or driving from polling place to polling place, and just being there as a resource to help voters who are having any problems, and also, again, to report issues to organizers and litigators who can try to solve them. And there are tons of different ways to volunteer. It depends on your area, what is the best way, but I think that would be a great way to get involved. Protectthevote.net.
And
Yeah, Lisa.
I was just going to say, two groups that are specifically targeted towards people with disabilities are Rev Up and Crip the Vote. And I can send the contact information, but those two groups are very involved in increasing turnout among people with disabilities, educating people what their state requirements are, and they also are providing volunteer opportunities for people if they want to get involved in that.
That's fantastic. Adriel, Fred, anything else to add in here?
I'll just say briefly, you can dispel the myths yourself. And like me, I was on the phone with an aunt who early voted yesterday. I was on the phone with an uncle last week, and I'm in the Washington, D.C. area. A group of friends of mine, about 12 of us, we were supposed to get together every Friday for happy hour, virtual happy hour. But tell us about voting. Of course, the conversation goes to voting, and you can dispel myths right there, because you'll be surprised that some of your friends don't know that what the process is if I don't want to go to the polls, and you can have this conversation. So you can dispel myths right in your own household, in your own neighborhood, in your own community, on the phone with your own family members. Each one teach one. I was a teacher first. Each one teach one. And I think that's what we have to do.
Yeah, I would encourage everyone to, it's repeated a lot, but to make a plan to know how you're going to vote. This time, maybe more than ever, there's a lot of options usually in most states. So make a plan, and especially if there's any chance for you to do that early, if you're going to vote in person early, if that's your intention, go ahead and do that. A lot of the problem here that we've been like, a lot of the clash between the pandemic and the election has to do with the idea of crowding. No one wants to see backed up lines shoulder to shoulder on November 3rd. And there's a bit of a cascading effect to that, because it's come up already, but poll workers are by and large over the age of 65 in the United States. It's just like proved and known that they're usually elderly folks who are doing it out of the goodness of their heart on that day. They're volunteering on that day. So no one should expect them to put themselves at risk, for to put that much on the line for their civic duty. So it's a cascading effect, because if you vote early or vote by absentee ballot early, your vote's already in. There's fewer people who go who have to go on election day. It's safer for poll workers. It's safer for folks like voters with disabilities who have to vote in person. And let's be clear, like no voting rights advocate is calling for an all-male election. Some people will need to vote in person. And it's just keeping everyone as safe as possible. And I guess, call to action at the end, I think Sylvia touched on it a little bit, but if you are in a safer demographic, I encourage you to reach out and be a poll worker, become a poll worker or a polling site manager. That's going to be crucial this time around, to have people who are not who feel like they can do that safely.
Can I add one last thing? Sorry.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Don't let this be like the Olympics where you don't think about Michael Phelps for 4 years. Next year, think about voting. Think about what laws are in place in your jurisdiction. Advocate for access to the ballot for all of your neighbors, not just you. You may be somebody who likes to go in person and vote, but think about your neighbor who has 3 jobs and can't go. Think about your neighbor who has a disability and can't go. Think about your neighbor who speaks a different language and needs materials in other languages, right? I think what happens is that people only think about elections on years, and a lot of the bad policy is set in the off years when people aren't paying attention. So pay attention.
I think that's an incredibly important point. And I will say that I think it's also about voting in every single election. So it's not just presidential, it's not just Senate. You know, we've gotten into the habit of voting for state and city council. You vote for school board. I mean, what's incredible is then there are less people voting. So you're really voting with this fewer group, and it's crazy what your impact is. And calling on your friends to say, keep voting, because then people understand what it's like to vote. The more we vote also, as I understand, the harder it is for people to suppress that. Because then you are fully educated, you understand your right to vote, you know where to vote, you know everything you're allowed. So I would strongly double down on that. I did also want to quickly follow up for others. What is the difference between a poll worker and a poll watcher? Because I do know that it might be slightly different, so I'd love to quickly just clarify for our audience.
Sure. So a poll worker is somebody who is employed by the Board of Elections and is running the election itself. So they're the person who checks you in, who hands you your ballot, who directs you to a machine. Poll watchers are political observers. In most states, it's only open to party employees or party designated individuals, and they are allowed to basically stand in some corner of the polling location and observe. And that is all that they are allowed to do. Yeah, so that is poll watcher, and the poll monitor, totally different, nonpartisan person who's standing outside and is there to offer advice and help if needed. I know all the terms are very confusing.
And you can also sign up to find out about that again at protectthevote.net, correct? Fantastic. And we also got a couple of other tags on Crypt the Vote, other links that I just would encourage our audience to look at in the chat for everybody. I'm sure also Columbia University will send a follow-up email to those who registered with all of those follow-up resources. I wanted to go to another question from our audience because we're getting a lot, so folks are interested, and I think despite some of the darkness, you're giving people hope. I just want to let everybody know that. So it's not all dark. So well done, everyone. One of the questions is, how do we engage with those who deny these issues exist or think they are not affected by these issues? And I want to bring up something specific. We see a lot of complaints about voter fraud, which, as Fred brought up at the beginning, is so rare, it's a joke. And then yet we see so many examples of voter suppression. But there's this argument, which I'm going to bring back, which is like, well, there are problems on both sides. That is not the case, right? We're seeing it's much more voter suppression. But how do we convince folks, maybe it's family members at Thanksgiving, maybe it's others, to understand that this actually is an issue? And no matter what party you support, no matter what candidate you support, it is so critical to fix it. What are the best talking points for our audience to talk to members that deny that this really exists?
I think you can go to a lot of our websites and receive talking points about it, but I'll be honest with you, a lot of people that engage in this argument, there's nothing you're going to say that's going to change their mind, and you'll be doing exactly what you watched last night. And I don't think unless you want to be a participant in that and you like that, then you two just go at it. But a lot of them, you know, for me, I give a few instances, I give a few examples, and then I leave it alone because I'm not going to become part of the spectacle that I witnessed, because that's what you'll end up doing. A lot of opinions are already made. Again, I guess I'm sounding a little dire. If you can indicate that percentage is 0.000 something, I don't know what else you need to say after that, you know? And they've been we've been tracking this for some 20 years now. And there are a few instances, I will tell you, there are a few instances, and you can give them where they involve a Republican operative in North Carolina, or you can find a Democratic one in Georgia. You can find a couple, you know, but just start with the percentage and leave it at that, and then switch the conversation to suppression, because they're not going to want to talk about that. And so I would just kind of learn from the candidates, talk around issues. And if you can kick it to suppression, then you're going to lose their interest, because it's a lot more of that than there is voter fraud. That's just my suggestion.
So we're going to confirm the folks should be going to websites to see some of those talking points and examples. Anybody else want to weigh in here?
Yeah, I mean, I think Fred touched on it. Well, I agree. I tried to avoid that battle. But I do find it that it lands, especially, you know, in thinking of, for example, of like the COVID issues. Like, I think the stakes or the burdens are clear on each side. So, for example, if you're talking like, I've been litigating a case where the state has put up, oh, well, we had 2 examples of voter fraud in the last 20 years, so that justifies having a witness requirement. You know, I've found that people react or get it when you say, yeah, but you also have 50,000 cases of COVID, and your state has, you know, like 2,000 people have died since March, and like, let's put those against each other. You know, like it's pretty stark that you would make it more likely that more people would get the virus because of those 2 isolated incidences in the past 20 years. So, you know, if you have facts like that, I encourage you to, you know, sometimes it does reach people. People do get it. Like, why would I make it harder to vote on hundreds of thousands of people because there were 2 people who, you know, usually by, frankly, not because of some organized fraud scheme, it's because like they just voted their son's absentee ballot or something, like put it in the mail or something like that.
Adriel, I do think that's actually very positive. I just want to let you know, you did a positive note there, because it is important to say you've got maybe 1 or 2 indications of voter fraud and then 50,000. And those numbers aren't crazy. Those numbers are legitimately what we're seeing in terms of voter suppression. And I do think that, I do agree with Fred that I think there's a lot of stuff where folks have made up their minds, but you're still allowed to throw some numbers out there to just give yourself a bit of support. I want to say that we're getting to the end of this panel, and I actually do feel a lot more hopeful about once voting, making sure my vote is counted. And I am really hopeful that if we get a new Senate, we can pass HR 1 and HR 4. Obviously, kind of that's where I am. I also want to say to folks that if you also want to take action, you can go to Vote Save America. There's some really cool things up on that website. But I do think that the organizations here, specifically nonpartisan, have some incredible things you can do, great talking points. And I also want to thank you all for being in such an intense fight, because as you said, this didn't just start. This has been going on for years and years and years. And thank you for what you're doing. So in closing, I would love each of you just to kind of close up and say, you know, once again, what people can do to ensure that they have as much power as possible, what people can do next year to not stop the fight, and your most positive feeling about this election cycle. I'm sorry, I'm going to make each of you end on an uplift here, because it is democracy, and I think we can get through this. So, you know, take it away. Why don't we start with Adriel?
I'll end where I always end, which is somewhere I don't think we've been before. But Fred, I'll take. You know, you had a lot of disclaimers about redistricting being kind of like not as sexy as election day stuff. I'll do you one up, and I'll take it to the census. If you haven't responded to the census, please answer it now. You know, it came up earlier that like the other side does seem to do some of these things better than this side, unfortunately. That is the clearest example. We have been, you know, to the neck in fights over the census and over who counts and over who gets to count for our democracy. The answer is easy. It is everyone, whether you are a child, non-citizen, an undocumented non-citizen, you count. You have to count. That's what the Constitution says. So, you know, the response rates have been looking better, but they're still not there. We're still not at 100%, which is what it should be. So I encourage everyone to fill out their census and tell others to fill out their census if they haven't done so already.
Got it. Fill out your census. We're putting that in the list. Who am I going to next? Sylvia, where are you on this?
You know, I think we've talked about a lot of it, right? Make a plan to vote. Make sure your friends and neighbors do. Engage people who, you know, go through your phone and call those people who are just kind of generally apathetic and don't engage. You know, check your registration, track your ballot and make sure it counts. Most states have a tracking mechanism so that you can actually see, so that if there are any problems, you can fix them. And, you know, I know that it seems a little bit hard these days sometimes, but I will tell you, you know, I live in Washington, D.C., and I went and visit and paid my respects to Representative John Lewis when he passed. And you know, it sounds really, really cheesy, but I just try to keep his spirit with me. Like, that man fought against so much, and he did it without the rights that I have. I'm lucky in comparison, right? So, you know, see what he did. We can, changes do happen. Don't give up.
I think that's fantastic. That's great. I am feeling inspired right now. This is good. These are moving up. These are moving up. John Lewis was a great one. Lisa, where are you on this?
Okay, so one of the issues for people with disabilities is they tend to be more socially isolated than other people. So reaching out and recruiting people with disabilities is really, really important. On a positive note, there was a surge in voting among people with disabilities in 2018. And I think a lot of people with disabilities are really very, very motivated to vote, and they're going to vote come hell or high water. They are determined to do it. So I'm optimistic on that.
That's fantastic. Please, everyone, follow Crip the Vote. There are incredible videos as well to share with your community to make sure that everybody gets the access to vote. So Lisa, you're absolutely right. And I do feel really positive about the number of registrations coming in. Fred, take us away and take us up.
Oh, you put all this pressure on me. I'll first say vote, certainly vote, and then learn about other methods that involve voting. Common Cause, the ACLU, the Lawyers Committee, we will be out there in your states if there are suppressive voting rights bills passed. We will be out there in your states if after November 3rd, there's a question about ballots and electronic voting machines. We will be out there doing redistricting hearings and workshops and presentations. Get involved. Find something that excites you, because November 3rd is not enough. You've got to keep doing things that are voting related. And positively, I am encouraged by the energy and excitement around this coming election. And I'm pleased to hear that there are tons of ballots out there that are being mailed and being received. And I think that's, aside from the dire stuff we talked about, I think that's something positive. So,
Fred, thank you. This has been, honestly, I feel inspired. I do feel good. And I will say that we have a lot of stuff to vote for this election, but 2022 is coming up and there's going to be a lot of other stuff to vote for. And as you know, we need to fix this. So please get involved. And thank you again to Columbia University and specifically the team here. I'm going to turn it back to Christina. And thank you so much to our panelists again. Huge, huge thanks to you all. Thank you for what you do.
Great, thank you so much, Liz. I'd like to thank you for moderating such an interesting and energetic conversation. I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today, and also for your individual and collective work, all that you do. So thank you very much. Thank you to those who joined us, and we encourage you to check out our next event on October 6th, which is on incarceration and rights. Thank you, everybody.